Szanowni Państwo, witam Państwa bardzo serdecznie. Upłynął właśnie obowiązkowy 6-minutowy krakowski kwadrans akademicki i dzięki temu możemy rozpocząć nasze spotkanie. Zanim przedstawię naszego gościa i bohatera dzisiejszego wieczoru, proszę pozwolić mi na krótki wstęp. To nasze trzecie niezwykłe spotkanie, które odbywa się w sali miedzianej Muzeum Historycznego Miasta Krakowa z powodu ważnego dla nas pretekstu. 120 lat temu, jak pokazuje ten rola, powstało Muzeum Historyczne Miasta Krakowa, które od 1 marca nosi nazwę Muzeum Krakowa. I z tej okazji naszego 120-lecia, to pan Tomek właśnie zrobi zdjęcie, żeby nie było wątpliwości, gdyby się coś kiedyś z tym roll-upem stało, to jest udokumentowane. Z okazji owego 120-lecia postanowiliśmy skonfrontować nasze 120-letnie doświadczenie z doświadczeniem liderów europejskiego i polskiego muzealnictwa. Przyświecała nam taka prosta myśl, że skoro 120 lat temu nasi ojcowie założyciele z jakichś powodów uznali, że to miasto dojrzało do muzealnej opowieści, to też warto skonfrontować, na jakim etapie ta muzealna opowieść znajduje się dzisiaj w innych miastach. Po spotkaniu, które zainaugurowało ten cykl z panem dyrektorem Janem Gerszofem z Frankfurtu, mieliśmy okazję spotkać się z panią dyrektor z Muzeum w Gdyni. A w dniu dzisiejszym, proszę Państwa, mam przyjemność przedstawić Państwu panią dyrektor z Muzeum z Liverpoolu, Janet Dugdale. Bardzo serdecznie witam. Pani dyrektor z pewnością wprowadzi nas w to wszystko, z czym do nas przyjechała i oczywiście po zakończeniu tego spotkania Państwo będziecie mieli możliwość zadać pytania. Wykład będzie prowadzony w języku angielskim. Ci z Państwa, którzy jeszcze nie pobrali, a na przykład potrzebują, to do pobrania są słuchawki. Dwie panie niezwykle profesjonalne siedzą za weneckim szkłem i będą Państwu starać się przekazać jak najwierniej to, w jaki sposób ta muzealna opowieść wygląda w Liverpoolu. So, Janet, welcome in Krakow. Thank you for coming. Thank you for accepting our invitation. You was invited to Krakow as a citizen of European Union, and today, after 29 March, you are still citizen of European Union. So we are waiting for the happy end for this fascinating drama. Proszę Państwa, Janet Dugdale jest do Państwa dyspozycji.
Thank you very much, Michal. Yes, I was rather a little worried about travelling to Krakow, or travelling out of England at all, with everything that has been going on. So I decided to come 2 days early. So I actually travelled on Sunday. So I've had a little time to get to know Krakow a little bit. And I too hope for a positive result or end to the whole drama, although that seems quite difficult at the moment. And certainly the museum I'm going to talk about this evening would not exist if it was not for Europe, because we also had a significant amount of European regional development funding to create the Museum of Liverpool. So I'm absolutely delighted to be with you here in Krakow tonight. I think you have an absolutely amazing city full of wonderful architecture, a real dynamic history, and a really strong identity. But we're here tonight to think a little bit about Liverpool. So here is Liverpool behind me. So this is actually a painting. It was painted, we commissioned it in 2008 when Liverpool was European Capital of Culture. It's by Ben Jonson, and it's called the Liverpool Cityscape. It's 8 metres long by 2 metres high, so showing it here doesn't give it justice, really. It's a big painting with a huge amount of architectural detail. The Museum of Liverpool is right at the heart of this painting, and then over to the left of the museum is the Albert Dock area, which shows the docklands of the 19th century, and over to the right are the 3 wonderful buildings of Liverpool's pierhead, Liverpool's famous waterfront, known as the 3 Graces, which were built at the start of the 20th century. So you can see the Museum of Liverpool is absolutely at the heart of the city. So tonight, I wanted to share with you some of our work on creating the museum and running the museum since 2011. So I've called this presentation, It's How We Do It That Matters, Curiosity and Collaboration in the Museum of Liverpool. And so tonight, I hope that by sharing our work, I hope to show that for us, responsive, relevant, and meaningful modern museums need to be outward-facing, agile, approachable, and collaborative. So I've divided tonight's presentation into 4 sections. The first one is a short introduction to National Museums Liverpool, the context in terms of a theme. Then I'm going to talk about the creating of the Museum of Liverpool, including sharing some of our thoughts 8 years on after opening. The third part I've called Making It Real, which is really about our socially purposeful and participative work at the museum with a number of case studies. And then I want to just finish by thinking about how. That really by being curious and collaborative really enables the Museum of Liverpool both to be authentic and relevant. And after 2 days of visiting some of your museums, I think there are some things we can really share and learn from each other. That importance of history, the importance of sharing, the importance of understanding our past for the present and for the future seems as relevant here in Krakow as it is in Liverpool. So, the Museum of Liverpool in context. I'm going to just share a little bit about National Museums Liverpool, our whole organisation, the Liverpool City region where we are, and also about UK museums. So, National Museums Liverpool, we are a group of 8 museums and galleries. We are national museums, so we're funded by the UK government centrally through the Department of Culture, Media and Sport. We're the only national museum that is wholly headquartered in an English regional city. And we have 5 museums and 3 art galleries. And usually we receive most of our funding from the government, but we also raise money through grants, through sponsorship, and also a lot of commercial activity. And we're the largest cultural employer in the northwest of England, with around 700 members of staff. Our usual visitor numbers are around 3 million visitors to all the museums and galleries, but last year, in 2018, we welcomed 4.1 million visitors, and that's because we had in our World Museum the exhibition China's First Emperor and the Terracotta Warriors with amazing loans from China. So more than 600,000 people came to see that exhibition, so that's really boosted the visitor figures. The Museum of Liverpool is our newest museum. It's our city history museum, and it opened in 2011. So Liverpool, you can see the museum here in the docklands, facing the waterfront of Liverpool. Liverpool is a port city in the northwest of England. You might know it perhaps for Beatles and the football, but there's a lot more. Okay, well, as you can see on this slide, we're a UNESCO World Heritage Site, particularly around the whole waterfront, and that's due to the maritime mercantile past. And also we're a UNESCO City of Music, both things that are really important for us in terms of telling our story and attracting visitors. So Liverpool grew as a port. It was a very small place, a fishing village, and really grew as a port from 1715 onwards, when the world's first commercial enclosed wet dock was built. And that really enabled Liverpool to grow and to trade right across the world, with Africa, with the Americas, with China, with India. Throughout the 18th century, Liverpool had already started to make money and then made much more money through the transatlantic slave trade. We estimate that 1.4 million enslaved Africans were actually carried on Liverpool ships in the triangular trade, where they were taken from Africa to the Caribbean and the Americas, with goods returning to Liverpool and goods from Liverpool being taken to trade in West Africa. And that's been a very much part of the city's history, which has enabled it to grow, enabled a lot of the architecture to be built, and it's a story that we tell and we absolutely remember in our museums. The population of Liverpool city region is around 500,000. Of Liverpool, the city, is 500,000, and across the region it's about 1.5 million. So it's not a big place, but it's a really important part of the northwest of England. Liverpool continued to grow in the 19th century after the abolition of the British slave trade, particularly because of the British Empire, and of course really started to decline in the 20th century from the 1920s onwards, so that by the time you got to the 1970s and containerisation, which had a massive impact on Poland as well, so the containerisation of vessels and shipping, it meant that the port really, really shrunk. And so Liverpool was in economic decline really until the 1980s, and it's only in the last 20 years that there's been a resurgence, particularly through cultural regeneration and much more investment. So in the UK, we have a Museums Association, our professional organisation, and their big campaign over the last few years has been under the slogan of Museums Change Lives. And this really speaks to us in Liverpool and at National Museums Liverpool, and it links with our values and our mission, which is to create memorable experiences for everyone, challenging expectations. So by being contemporary and relevant, understanding society today and using history to help us explain the context for a place, we feel that we can make a difference to people's lives. So moving on, creating the Museum of Liverpool, I'm going to talk a little bit about the museum's story, what we set out to do, and how we created the museum. So here, this photograph was from one of our exhibitions by this great group of 2 photographers who set up in a caravan, and they move around and take photographs of different cities. And one of the big things in Liverpool is on a night out, a Saturday night, all the girls will be walking around in town with rollers in their hair, ready to go out that evening. And they captured a lot of the quirky identity of the city through their photographs. So the museum is a new 10,000 square metre building right on the banks of the River Mersey, at the heart of Liverpool's historic waterfront. The project cost £75 million, which I think is around 375 million zloty, so it was a lot of money, mainly through public money, actually, so it was incredibly difficult to do that now. We had a different government in power. A significant amount of the money came through regional infrastructure investment, and then also through the European Regional Development Fund, because Liverpool had Objective 1 status. So this museum would not be here if it wasn't for Europe, and people in Liverpool absolutely appreciate that, and of course voted to remain. So the museum was seen as being able to be part of a catalyst in terms of economic and social development. And I can answer more questions around that, and I've got some reports with me if people are interested in the economic impacts of the museum. So this was a photograph taken during the construction of the museum. You can see us right in the heart of that Liverpool waterfront. So I really wanted to make the point that location really matters. So we're at the heart of the city, and because we're right on the waterfront, we're part of the city's brand. Great to see your new brand for museums here in Krakow, but for us, we're absolutely part of that Liverpool's identity. And we really thought long and hard, and we did all the proper options appraisal about where to put the museum, but for us, being in a place that looked out in terms of the River Mersey, looked out to the Irish Sea, to the Atlantic Ocean, and then inland towards Manchester and into the city was the perfect place to tell the story of Liverpool as a port city. It's great to be part of Liverpool's brand because whatever photograph anyone uses in terms of destination marketing, pretty much the museum is on it. So that's wonderful for us. But it's also special to be in a place that's a place of arrival and departure, a place that's symbolic of growth and decline, and also now symbolic of cultural resurgence. So just so that you know, this is not an easy place to build a museum. This map is from 1725, so 10 years after Liverpool built its first enclosed wet dock, which is just to the right of the image. You can see the ships in the enclosed dock, because Liverpool has a big tidal range of 10 metres. And the museum is built more or less where the M is of the River Mersey, so it's all on reclaimed land. So in the 18th century, it was still the river. After that, a dock was built on the site, the Manchester dock, and then in the 1920s, that was infilled. And then in the 1980s, it became a car park. So that's the site on which we built the museum. We owned the car park, which was great for us, but creating a really big museum meant it's built on a raft, really, that's about 3 metres. It's incredible, actually, the engineering of the building. This, again, was a view as we were building the museum. So our aim at National Museums Liverpool was to create a city history museum that really reflected the city, a museum that was to be flexible and to become an active participant in the city, part of the city's landscape, and able to engage with the many communities and the people that we serve and also our visitors. We wanted to create a museum with a personality, one that could be an active citizen by, with, for, and of the people. So in 2001, we started to work on the concept for the new City History Museum, the Museum of Liverpool. And over the next few years, we really developed the relationships that we'd need to create and sustain a new museum. And anyone working in museums knows how important relationships are. Relationships with funders, with politicians, with stakeholders and influences, and for us, with all of our communities and the people of Liverpool and the city region. And it really is a long game trying to create a big city history museum. We had to develop strategic links, we had to share our aims, we had to gain trust, we had to really seize opportunities and develop those meaningful relationships. And that all takes real time and actually real determination and some very effective decision-making to come to fruition, actually produce something new, because people are sceptical, and particularly in a city that had suffered decline, that it would actually happen and that we'd actually be able to realise the scale of our ambitions. So our idea was to create a large, outward-facing, high-quality building that had a flexible infrastructure, but a real passion for storytelling, and I hope that that will come out later on in the presentation, and a place that could be a biographer of the city. So this is just a cut through of the building, just so that I can talk to you a little bit about what it's like to be inside. I'm not going to take you on a tour of the building because I want you all to come to the museum, and I'll happily meet anybody and take them round. But I wanted to talk about the concept for the museum. So we had 4 key concepts, 4 ideas that we wanted to explore to develop the museum, and we tested those with many people in terms of our consultation and our participatory work. We wanted to explore Liverpool as a port city, as a global city, a people city, and a creative city. And those themes have ended up being 7 different galleries and many, many flexible spaces set over the 3 floors. And from those floors, particularly on the 2nd floor, there are views out on the city. So the city and the museum come together, and the museum is a lens for exploration in the city. You start at the centre, right in the heart of the museum, and visitors can then choose where to go, so there is no route to follow through the museum. So it's a bit like being in a city street. You can bump into people, you can explore something different, take a different journey, whenever you come, and the museum is free at the point of entry. And because of this concept, it means we can change content in one part of the gallery without upsetting the narrative. And we decided to do that rather than create a chronology. Just want to give you a couple of slides showing the museum up on the second floor. So these are really big picture windows. They're 9 metres high and 30 metres wide. And our aim was to create a city history museum that really reflected the city and was very much part of its identity, and a museum that was connected to the landscape outside and that could enable reflections and connections from inside the museum. And we felt that by making these types of connections, the importance of the physical place of Liverpool would become part of the museum and its story. And that idea of the Liverpool as a destination, through being part of the Liverpool placemaking, the museum would be very close to that idea of Liverpool as a destination. And we hoped that the views out of the windows would help create emotional connections for people's experiences. We also have a really large collection, from really small things like trade union badges up to locomotives. This locomotive dates from 1832 and ran on the Liverpool-Manchester passenger railway, which in 1830 was the first passenger railway in the world. So we absolutely had to create a place that was strong enough to take the biggest items in our collections. Although we did take that thematic approach, we felt that there should be some chronology in the museum, and from listening to people, that's what they wanted. So on the first floor of the museum, there's an 80-metre long timeline that starts in the Ice Age and comes to the present day. So that's the place where you can find a continuous story, a chronology. When we opened the museum in 2011, it was actually opened by an 8-year-old boy. So we had a people's opening. He wrote to us and said that he really enjoyed watching the museum being built, and he liked opening things, and could he open the museum? And we just thought that was great, so we decided to have a people's opening. So he actually cut the ribbon, Finn O'Hare, and earlier that day we had golden tickets for everyone who'd been part of our participative projects. They all came at 8 o'clock in the morning, so we didn't have the VIP champagne. We had the people who'd helped create the museum came first. And then Finn, the 8-year-old, opened the museum, which seemed quite fitting. Later in that year, when we'd completed all the galleries, we had Her Majesty the Queen came and gave a second official opening to the museum. I'm here with the chair of our trustees, who is a television writer and film producer, Phil Redmond. So he was very supportive all the way through of creating a place that was about stories and about people. So that long-term commitment from 2001 to 2011, 10 years of getting all the funding together, and after having talked to Michael, we all know it takes a lot of time to make the case and get the funding together to create big things in museums. So we developed and co-produced a lot of the content for the museum, and we worked with more than 10,000 people in lots of different ways, sometimes through listening and having open workshops, through talks, through lectures, through some various panels that we set up to advise us, and then also very closely through co-creating and co-curating a number of content, parts of content throughout the museum. So we set out to create a museum with really strong foundations. One that really understands the power of storytelling for building relationships. We really believe that as a platform for shared experiences, and exploring narratives, museums can enable dialogue. And we feel that storytelling really helps create those platforms for communication. And it brings value to others, and it nurtures relationships. Stories are what connects us as human beings. We also felt very strongly that we wanted to put the adjectives back into storytelling. Right from the start, there's a whole campaign at the moment that museums are not neutral, and we felt very strongly that although the museum has an editorial role, that actually it had to be full of many voices. But we're honest about that editorial role. And here, actually in fake stone, fake granite throughout part of the people's part of the museum, we have a number of quotes. And the quote here I want to read to you is from a woman at the Margaret Symey, who was in her 80s at the time, in 1999, when she said, "The magic of Liverpool is that it isn't England," and she was a community activist. And so people like her are very much part of the permanent story of the museum. And we know that as museum staff, when we're really aligned to our visitors and our audiences and our users, it's all a lot stronger. We also think that the museum needs to have an opinion, and it can be a safe place for exploring different stories and different narratives, but actually the museum needs to have an opinion. So we developed the idea that really the museum has an attitude, and perhaps compared to some of the other museums and galleries in our group, it's a bit like the teenager of museums. And I just wanted to share an example here of a project we did a couple of months after opening the museum. We worked with young people and a photographer, and they took photographs of themselves in the style of old masters, but they were all from a very deprived part of the city in Norris Green. And I just wanted to read to you what one of them said about their part of the city, which is called L11. And the whole exhibition was called Postcode, so all different parts of the city have a different postcode. So they were from L11. And he wrote, "The press only pick up on the shootings and the bad things that happen in Norris Green. When you live here, it feels quiet. If you wear certain clothes, you will get stopped. When I got stopped, I was wearing my black tracksuit and my hat. There was no other reason. And at the time, the police had started to stop and search young people, and they felt very strongly that they were being stereotyped." So throughout the museum, we include challenging, controversial, campaigning, and sometimes uncomfortable content. And not everyone agrees that the museum should cover these subjects. Liverpool is a very vociferous city. Like most urban environments, port cities, that expanded rapidly in the 19th century and then shrunk. It's a place where people have to stand up for what they believe in and stand up for their rights. So it has a strong trade union, a strong labour movement. And like any city, there are many dichotomies between growth and decline, recent resurgence, between wealth and poverty, between acceptance and racism. And Liverpool is quite interesting in that it has quite strong links to the rest of the world, but is still quite isolated in the UK. And the perception of Liverpool, certainly pre-European capital of culture within the UK, was not a high one, based on people who'd never been there, but that's what perception is all about. So as a vociferous place, people really challenge us and ask many questions and push us to show content that they want in the museum. We created more than 70 documentary films in the museum, and we really strive to have impact. And we feel that the one way that we can do that is to have a lot of first-person testimony, whether that's through oral histories or through documentary films, to continue to connect us as human beings. And we know that our visitors, whether they're from the region or whether they're from the UK or international visitors, connect very strongly to people's voices. But it's not all serious. We also want to have fun and be humorous. And we've tried to represent and explore the identity of Liverpool. And the example here is a comedian called Ken Dodd, who had, he actually had a pop song. He had a #1 in the 1960s. He was a famous comedian. He had television programs. And up until 3 years ago, he died 2 years ago, up until 3 years ago, he was still performing on stage. And he's very much part of that tradition of Liverpool performers and storytellers. So finding fun ways to talk about the city is also important to us. And we can do that in a really big space. We've got the space and the narrative to tell many stories. We also delight in nostalgia and involvement, and we work to meet our audience needs. So here people are sitting inside an original carriage from the Liverpool Overhead Railway. It was the first electrified railway in the world, and it opened in 1893, and it closed in 1956. And you can see the delight on their faces. And we actually built, it's actually standing at about 4.5 meters high, and we built everything around it from the original blueprints, which are in the museum collection. But people being able to go onto an original carriage has been really important. And although it closed in 1956, so many people talk about it, including people who could never remember travelling on it. And it's just one of those iconic parts of the city. It ran 7 miles across the docks. We also set out to be open and confident. We aim to develop an honest and contextualised approach, and we tell hidden stories, and we've really become known for telling hidden stories. So as well as the big, high-level, broad narrative of Liverpool as a city and as a port city, we tell many hidden stories and we explain decisions. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this project later on, but our overall strategy has been quite outward-facing, and so many people contact us wanting to work with us, and that's very important for us to stay alive. But as a museum, we're also very tenacious. We have a real passion to drive and develop the museum, but we really acknowledge that everyone has a right to tell their story in a history museum, and that collaboration and participation has been really important all the way through creating the museum and then since we opened. And our co-production programme, especially through Our City, Our Stories, has been essential to enable people to engage with us within a framework. So it's Our City, Our Stories is our branding for our partnership programme, where we work with people on co-producing exhibition and displays, also films, events, and other types of interactives. And having that strong model has enabled us to show people really visibly how we collaborate and that we value their input. So through all of this, the museum is really alive. We try to be responsive, but this means a real strong emphasis on programming so that the museum doesn't stay static. And sometimes even small changes can be really media-worthy. And out of all of our museums, our social media following is the most international. So 30% of the people who follow us on social media are an international audience. Okay, I'm going to go on to talk a little bit about making it real. So some more specific case studies about the museum, and particularly our socially purposeful and participative work. I want to share with you kind of my reflections, really, and I've put this together for tonight, some of the kind of guiding principles that perhaps have framed our strategy. And I've kind of analysed our recent work and thought about how the work that we do comes together and makes the museum in terms of a strategy. We continue to develop our relationships, and these sort of 10 ideas or principles, frameworks are the things that I think have so far made this approach successful. So the first one of those is that we walk the talk. And this absolutely, you can't have a mission and values and not follow through on it with action. People in a really visible, high-profile museum would soon notice. So a couple of examples here. One is Little Liverpool. So right at the front door of the museum, there's a gallery which is designed for children aged 6 and under. So it's called Little Liverpool. It's our children's gallery, and we wanted it right by the front door to show that families and young children are really welcome. And so from this space, which has programmes throughout the day, it really encourages our youngest visitors to go out and explore the themes of the museum. And it was developed through some significant relationships. We got some sponsorship from our local newspaper, and from that, we funded an artist to work with children aged 4 and 5. And you can see them standing in this bottom left-hand image. That was when they had their golden ticket to come and visit the museum as the first visitors in the museum. They created all of the artwork, they did all of the drawings for that gallery, they chose the objects, and they were waiting to go in and see it. And that was, for me, one of the most special moments. We also worked with young people, with teenagers, in creating the museum. And here, a second example of walking the talk is a group called Ready Extra. So they were the youth group. And again, we got some external funding to help us do this. We employed an artist, and with the artist, we interviewed, in a gentle way, but we interviewed a number of different community organisations who wanted to do something for the museum. And we chose this group called Ready Extra from the north of the city. And here you can see them in hard hats during the construction of the museum, standing where their sculpture was going to be. And Our idea was that they created a sculpture to go in the case, the biggest case that you see. It's the first thing you see, really, when you come in the museum. And so many people said to me, what's going to be the object? What are you going to choose from the collection to represent Liverpool? And I said, don't worry, it's a community arts project. We're working with young people. We don't know what it's going to be yet, but it's going to be what they want it to be to represent Liverpool. So they decided to make something called the Pool of Life, and they made it from recycled materials. And they were quite a hard group, and actually the artist, after a couple of sessions, said, oh, this is too hard. We should have picked someone who'd done community arts projects before, and absolutely no. So we put in extra resource, we helped her with all of the sessions because it was so important that we continued to work with them, and they absolutely delivered something for the opening of the museum. So that case, we change it all the time, but actually this sculpture now belongs to them, and it's in a shopping centre near where their youth group is. So we really seek to understand context. I think we all operate in society as museums. We really need to think about where we are. So to develop meaningful museums and relationships, we need to think about how we operate. So for us, the urban context of Liverpool is really important. Liverpool is still considered one of the most deprived cities in the UK. So within England, it has 34 out of the lowest 100 most deprived neighbourhoods. So that's really quite significant. And that's based on income. So that kind of economic impact is really challenging for people who live within Liverpool. So that means the welfare bill is the highest per capita in the UK, low life expectancy, employment rate, skill levels, education are all below the national average, and some major health challenges. And so all of that gives us the context in which we operate. So therefore we believe we do need to be really socially responsible as museums. So we decided that we would, on reflection, what we've created is something with very strong building blocks. So quite a flexible museum in terms of the spaces, in terms of the infrastructure, but the team as well. It's a very inside-out way of working. So for all of our staff, they're very outward focused and also need to be very welcoming to everyone who comes to the museum. So right in the heart of the museum, we act as a place for performance in the city. We take part in many festivals and events. And this means that we get, I suppose, free programming, and we're part of everything that's going on in the city. That helps us tell so many different stories, because many of the festivals that happen, you don't necessarily have material culture to tell those stories and represent them in the city. And when we're part of festivals, it brings visitors, but it also means that we're part of any of the marketing and the branding for festivals. We also work very carefully with people in creating a lot of the content. I just wanted to share this example called Echoes of Everton. So we worked with people from West Everton Community Centre, which is one of the two football clubs in Liverpool, Liverpool and Everton. So Everton is one area of the city. They wanted to create a model of their area, and there are 4 sections in it that represent change in time over 200 years. So it went from a place of green fields to lots of back-to-back terraced housing to lots of high-rise to now more owner-occupied houses. But it's a real example of co-production. So we worked with the group in their spaces to understand what they wanted to be on the model. They decided what areas of Everton should be displayed. They took all of our team out on walks. So they helped create the brief that then we employed a model maker. And we wrote into the contract for the model maker that they also had to meet with the group as well. So we tried to make sure that people's voices, as well as being heard or read in quotes, were actually part of a lot of the content in the museum. So all of this really led me to kind of want to explore with you that it's really a mindset, that this kind of museum practice that's very outward facing, it's based on values, requires really strong and resilient staff. And some of our staff, have worked on a lot of quite hard subjects over a number of years, and that will be the case for people working in museums in Krakowa as well. And we need to look after them. We need to look after our teams. So for me, probably the hardest moment in my whole career is working with some of the families who lost relatives, including some very young children and teenagers, in the Hillsborough football tragedy, which was almost 30 years ago. So on the 15th of April 1989, Liverpool were playing away in Sheffield at the Hillsborough Stadium, and 96 Liverpool fans were crushed. Over many years, we've worked with the family support group, and this is the chair and the secretary of the Hillsborough Family Support Group. And we talked to them from a really early stage about what we wanted to do in the museum. And we have a big film about the spirit of being a football fan, but it also includes a small section around Hillsborough. And so we worked with them, we showed them the rough cuts, we changed it in the way they wanted to. And for me, I think it's been the most difficult. And also I thought everyone who worked on it, and there were two of us who met very regularly, felt we were very responsible for everything that we did in the museum and how we were representing a really difficult part of their lives. Over the years, they've given us material for the museum, so this mosaic was made and given to them. Manchester United Football Club gave us a shirt that was worn in 2012 to show solidarity with the families, with the 96 on the back. For us, it went absolutely viral in terms of Twitter, the more than 1,000 retweets, and it really brought the two kind of rival football cities together. And over the last few years, we've done something on the outside of the museum. So in 2014, we just put up the date, 15th of April, 1989, and these are 4-metre-high vinyl images on the front of the museum. We had to be really careful because over the last few years, there's been an inquiry, a public inquiry, and then an inquest. So we're going to do something like this year. In fact, it's going up this week. Just 96, and there'll be 2 minutes silence, and there won't be any comments. There's been nothing in the press because at the moment there are criminal prosecutions, so no one can comment around it. So as a museum, we try to do the right thing to show support in the right way, but we have to be very careful sometimes about some of the things that we do. And everything we've done has been in consultation with the Hillsborough Family Support Group, and we would never do anything media related around this work. It's actually just to show people who know and understand that the museum is supportive. So I think another kind of principle is that we're courageous, and collaborative museums need to have the courage of their convictions. So I just wanted to share an example here of an exhibition called From There to Here, which was actually part of a bigger project, a theatre company called Wicked Fish, who are 5 disabled people, of which 3 of them have learning difficulties, wanted to create an exhibition about the history of people with learning difficulties. So the From There to Here is from the past to now, and they wanted to talk about the words that people have been called in the past and contrast that with what's seen as politically correct now, and also include photographs and work with artists to really record the experience of young people with learning difficulties. So we absolutely put that in the heart of the museum. So I showed you the ground floor atrium. This is up on the 2nd floor. It's our skylight gallery. This part of the museum is always about people, and it's opposite where the very first painting I showed you, the Ben Jonson Liverpool cityscape, is. So as well as curating the exhibition with our curator of community history, they also performed on gallery and had an amazing response from people who really engaged with the subject. And they also did all of the press work and all the radio interviews for the exhibition, and they won a big award from the local newspaper for all of their work. We've also thought very carefully about how we engage with national commemorations. So in England, there's been a lot of work around 1914, 1918 in terms of the centenary of the First World War. And we had a long-term exhibition which looked at the dockers who went to fight on the Western Front. But in terms of our response over the last few years, we wanted to do some different work. So one of the first things we did was the image on the left, which actually looked at black soldiers. And we had to do a huge amount of research to find the history of black soldiers from Liverpool who fought in the First World War. And then the second exhibition, Poppies, is the work of a photographer, Karen Lee Stowe, and she photographs women in war zones today. So our responses were really different. This was some of the research that we got some additional funding for. We also love innovation, and we try to be really curious. And just to explain what this project is, we've tried to be entrepreneurial. So as part of that 1418 Now project, we did some work with the Liverpool Biennial and a contemporary artist, Carlos Cruz Diaz, and he dazzled a ship in our collection, the largest object in our collection, which is just outside the Museum of Liverpool. So we repainted it as a contemporary art project. Dazzle ships were the way that ships were disguised during the First World War so that people couldn't work out what speed or distance they were travelling. This project got national attention. It was on the BBC Breakfast. But the interesting thing for us was that there's a Liverpool band, OMD, Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark, from the 80s. And the lead singer, Andy McCluskey, is here. And one of their second album was Dazzle Ship. So we contacted him and said, would you fancy playing on a Dazzle Ship? Well, it was a bit difficult to play on the ship because we couldn't get enough people. But actually, we had our first gig in the museum, which sold out in 2 minutes. And we did 2 gigs as a fundraiser. So that was something new for us as a museum. And then we've had to be really patient and really play the long game. So I said about the Beatles, when I first worked in Liverpool, there was one item in the collection that was a ticket from the Cavern Club from the early 1960s and very little else to do with the Beatles. So it was really important to represent Liverpool's popular culture. So we set out to collect material from their early days in Liverpool, but also representative material around their kind of international fame. So obviously these are Russian dolls which were sold as part of mass merchandising. One of the largest items that we collected is this stage, which is the stage that John Lennon was playing on in July 1957 with his band, the Quarrymen, when he first met Paul McCartney. So perhaps you could see this is where it all began, and we show this with a film of the early Beatles in the museum. We've collected small items like autograph books, and we've stayed in touch with the various people involved in the Beatles. And particularly, we've had a lot of support from Yoko Ono. She came to the dinner that we had as a fundraising dinner when we first cut ground to build the museum. And she's actually been to the museum 3 times. So here she was at the official opening, meeting the Queen. And that kind of long game, looking after our long-term relationships, has really helped, because our current exhibition, Double Fantasy, is the story of John and Yoko. It's 1,000 square metres. It's a big, free exhibition. We've had 400,000 visitors to that exhibition. It was due to close at the end of April, but we're keeping it on until November, just because there's been so much public demand. And it's a one-off. It's unique. It's their story. We've worked closely with Yoko and her archivist. You won't see it anywhere else in the world. So if you want to come to Liverpool this summer, do come and see Double Fantasy. And both she and Sean came to the exhibition opening, so it was wonderful to get her over in Liverpool again. We collaborated with her and her team in December, and throughout Liverpool we put up digitally and with posters a kind of recreation of their War Is Over campaign, Happy Christmas from John and Yoko. So that got us again a lot more attention around the exhibition. And outside an immersive area playing the Imagine Peace film, we've got a response wall, Remember Love, and people are just posting on that every day. It's been really quite incredible, very emotional comments about world peace, as well as their responses to John Lennon and Yoko Ono. So another exhibition I wanted to share with you is a project that we just completed and opened in October of last year. It was at least 5 years in the making. So Galkoff's and the Secret Life of Pembroke Place. Percy Galkoff was he was born in Lodz, actually, and moved to Liverpool around 1907, and had certainly set up a kosher butcher's by 1917 in Pembroke Place, which was one of the Jewish areas of Liverpool. So the wonderful tiled facade was put on in the 1930s, and it was in terrible disrepair. So I'd always wanted to move a building. I've never been able to do that, but we actually managed to move the tile facade to the museum. So we had an amazing project which we got some funding from our Heritage Lottery Fund, It was 2 million zloty, approximately. We worked with a really big stakeholder group, and we also worked with Liverpool's Jewish community, who really wanted the front of this building to be saved and to record the stories of everyone who lived in that area. And we also worked with the family. Although they'd left Liverpool, we worked with his grandson, his great-grandson, and his 2 great-great-grandsons. And our 2 curators came to Poland with the family to research where the family had grown up and where they'd lived, and they managed to trace them back to the beginning of the 19th century. It was hard to find a lot of material, but actually we found that Liverpool's Jewish community, so many people had stories and memories that we employed an artist, and she drew people's memories. So rather than recording oral histories, we actually created artwork, which is part of the project and part of the exhibition. So through all of this, we absolutely believe that together we're stronger, that with shared ideas, values around social justice and social responsibility, kind of real partnership, an effective collaborative museum is no longer about ego. It's actually about having contemporary relevance and working together. And one of the projects I wanted to share with you was this one, April Ashley, the exhibition. April Ashley, Portrait of a Lady, opened in 2013. We tried to work with April, and she came to the museum's opening in July 2011, and a week afterwards, via an LGBT arts organisation called Homotopia, she contacted us and said she wanted to work with the museum and with Homotopia to tell her story. And at that moment, I knew we created the right kind of museum because people would trust us. So April was born in 1935 in Liverpool. She was one of the first people to transition and undergo gender reassignment surgery in the 1960s. And she's a major kind of icon in terms of trans people, but also she was a real campaigner for legal recognition. So it might have been seen as a controversial exhibition, but it was absolutely the right thing to do. We had here, I just wanted to share that doing the right thing in the right way, you can get an amazing response. And EAV means equivalent advertising value. So we had the equivalent of £1 million worth of editorial coverage right across the world, actually, for this exhibition. The response on social media was incredible. Here, someone said, "I cried happy tears twice." And throughout the exhibition and every year since, we've commemorated Trans Day of Remembrance, and we work closely with the police and their hate crime reporting unit. And for the last 2 years, that's in November every year. And then for the last 2 years, we've done some work on Trans Day of Remembrance, of visibility, which is kind of more positive side. And that was just on the 31st of March, so just on Sunday, actually. So the last commemoration. So this year, trans men and women in Liverpool programmed the whole day at the museum, and it was the last day of one of our current exhibitions. We've also brought together external funding. So this project, Pride and Prejudice, linking on with our LGBT work, we managed to acquire some funding so that we could employ researchers to go back into our collections and research material that would have had a link or could have had a link to Liverpool's lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans history, and kind of reinterpret the collections, whether they're on display or not. So it's a web-based project. So for instance, one of Liverpool's famous films, Letter to Brezhnev, was actually directed and produced. Both of the director and the producer were both gay men, and that hadn't been recorded. So we went back and recorded that as part of understanding the documentation around our collections. And for the last few years, we've had a whole day around LGBT History Month with many, many speakers, and that's in February every year. And 2 years ago, we held the national launch, and because of that, we had Stuart Milk came over from the United States to speak to us about human rights across the world. Our current exhibition, Tales from the City, which looked at 50 years of Liverpool's LGBT stories, which opened in the end of 2017, just closed on Sunday. And we've had more than 300,000 visitors to that exhibition, and more than 90 people took part in actually creating that exhibition with us. So we borrowed objects, we borrowed photographs, we recorded people, and we created documentary films. And that kind of level of trust I think has been incredibly important for everything we've tried to do. And one last example from that exhibition was this one, really. So Otterspool Promenade is a promenade, a kind of area by the river, and it was a place where gay men used to meet in secret in the 1950s and 1960s. And the curators, alongside this object, which they've kind of hidden a little bit with the display, I just want to read the label text to you. In the past, many LGBT people's lives, mementos and special places had to remain hidden. Their meanings have been lost or obscured over time. Today, although society and the law have changed, people still cannot always love and live their lives freely. We have chosen to conceal some items within this exhibition to acknowledge this. So just the last couple of thoughts, really. We really tried to succeed by being curious, finding the partnerships, developing collaborations, to think about the city we live in, the world we live in a different way. So a couple of examples. Last year, there was Vote 100. It was the centenary of women over the age of 30 being able to vote in England. And we wanted to do something. We couldn't do an exhibition because we were doing John and Yoko's Double Fantasy. So we actually developed a series of happenings and events with different partners where we really encouraged young women to think about voting. We had projects with the women's organisation, we had women's business breakfast, and we really thought about the impact on women's lives today of being able to vote 100 years ago. And we also did a couple of interventions in the museum. So one of them was just really to think about how hard people had really fought that we could vote. So here is a quote from 1908. Mossley Hill is the area of Liverpool where I live. And the woman wrote into the local newspaper to say, "Those who support the country have a right to a voice in the government of the country. Even women have a right to justice." And the poster on the right was that just to remind people that actually women went to jail for campaigning, both peacefully but also very actively in a very militant way for the vote. And when they were in prison, sometimes they went on hunger strike. And when the women went on hunger strike, they were force-fed. So this was in the years between 1908 and 1913. And so this is force-feeding equipment that we borrowed from another national museum, but it was actually used in one of the jails, Walton Jail in Liverpool. And I think it just brought home to everybody how brutal that was and how much some women had gone through so that other women could vote. Another project which we researched a whole area of the city, and it's been really valuable to us to record parts of the city in a lot of depth. So we looked at the secret life of Smithtown Road. So this was an area of the city that's a really diverse part of the city. It was our first use of Facebook to really get people involved in participation. So as well as creating content for an exhibition, we also really recorded that part of the city. So we collected objects that were sold in the shops. We took really great photographs, documentary photographs of all the people who ran the shops, and we also recorded their histories. And to do that, we created a temporary display in a cafe, so lots of people came and helped share their memories with us. So just to finish, really, that whole idea really is the idea of your museum, that actually it's not our museum, that museums are sharing kind of power and responsibility around representation, and that if we're really approachable, we can be responsive to our audiences and to our participants. I've left some information on the side, and part of it is around our House of Memories programme, which is a training and awareness programme to help people to live well with dementia. So, just to finish, the how part. I hope I've shown that through curiosity and collaborative relationships, we get trust. So I believe if you start with curiosity, which is outward-facing and intuitive, and then you add in collaborative relationships and partnerships, which is all about sharing, then you build trust, and that key platform can really make a difference to museums, and especially in city museums, which is our theme here today, where we can all be socially active and responsible as museums in practice. We also do similar work in some of our other history museums. So just next to the Museum of Liverpool, across the dock, we have Merseyside Maritime Museum and our International Slavery Museum. For the Maritime Museum, we have a propeller from a passenger ship that was sunk in 1915, the Lusitania, and every year there's a memorial service on the 7th of May. And in the lead up to creating a whole new permanent display and exhibition about the Lusitania, which opened in 2015, for the 2 years prior to that, in 2013 and 2014, we gave everyone who came to the service a postcard and asked them whether they would like to get in touch and work with the museum. And through that, more than 100 families who had lost relatives, because almost 1,200 people died on the Lusitania, got in touch with the museum, lent us material, gave us other material as well. So just as simple as giving people a postcard and saying, this is what we're thinking of doing, would you like to get in touch? That's really helped people be part of creating that content. And we've also worked internationally, an example here with the Australian Maritime Museum, looking at child migrants. So hundreds of thousands of children, whether they were orphaned or incredibly poor, were forcibly sent from England to Canada, Australia, and South Africa from the 1860s to the 1960s. So this was an incredibly powerful story around children's experiences. Our International Slavery Museum, as well as looking at the transatlantic slavery and Liverpool's role and legacies of slavery, it also looks at modern slavery. Its whole theme is around we remember, we act. And a lot of the work that we do now is partnership projects, so that we create a platform for a lot of NGOs who work to campaign against modern slavery and human trafficking. And here are a couple of examples of those. And every year we have a walk of remembrance through Liverpool on the 23rd of August, which is the United Nations Day for remembering the slavery. So for me, how really matters. How we do what we do and why we do it really matters in museums. I think that by being curious and collaborative, it has enabled us in the Museum of Liverpool to be authentic and relevant. And I think it creates a fertile environment for collaboration and participation for all modern museums. And so for us, that's meant visitors. I think it's meant creating museums that are for people, but with equal access to their stories, their histories, and their cultural heritage. So far, 6.5 million people have been to the Museum of Liverpool. And while we still have John and Yoko on, do come and visit us. That closes on the 7th of November. So come and be part of that imagining peace for the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much for wonderful speech. Muzeum is not neutral. Muzeum nie jest neutralne, powiedziała Janet. No, wyobraźcie sobie Państwo, że powiesilibyśmy na ścianie wejściowej do Muzeum Historycznego Miasta Krakowa taki napis, że fenomen Krakowa polega na tym, że nie jest Polską. Zrobiłaby się, jak sądzę, niezła awantura bardzo prędko. Proszę Państwa, zapraszam bardzo serdecznie do zadawania pytań. Janet ma urządzenie głośno mówiące, które nasze pytania będzie tłumaczyć, także bardzo serdecznie zapraszam, jeżeli ktoś chciałby o coś zapytać. Bardzo proszę.
Thank you very much for the inspiring talk. I have a question regarding the opening of the museum. You were saying about people's opening, and you said that people who helped creating the museum came first. And I wanted to ask in what way people could help and did help creating the museum. You said about the Little Liverpool project, but I believe there's more.
Yes, okay. So, well, the people who had those golden tickets were people who took part in a number of ways. So they were either part, we had a number of different I'm losing my words now. We had a number of different advisory groups. So we had an advisory group for early years, we had a teacher advisory group, we had a community advisory group. So we had a number of advisory groups. We had the people who'd worked with us on the first series of the Our City, Our Stories programme. So for instance, the people who'd worked on that model of Everton, so permanent parts of the exhibition, as well as sort of temporary exhibitions. So anyone from any organisation or small group who'd been involved in those groups. We had an access to heritage group, so young people who had disabilities, so different to the group that I mentioned, Wicked Fish. So they were there, and then some of the schools who were actually involved in the Little Liverpool, the Little Designers programme. So there were people involved in helping to create a lot of the content, people involved in oral histories. So we kind of kept a record, and there's a rolling screen which actually acknowledges all of their input into the museum. So for us, they were the people who helped us to create the museum. So I said that we worked with more than 10,000 people. So some of those people we worked with in workshops and generating ideas and testing out some of the ideas around content. So the people who were at the People's Opening were the people who actually really worked with us and helped us.
Proszę Państwa. Bardzo proszę. Do mikrofonu.
Thank you. You told us you often tell stories on difficult subjects, so what was your most controversial exhibition or project so far, or one that caused any public outcry?
Okay. Thank you for your question. So you asked me about what's our most controversial project or what had caused any outcry. So, I mean, it could have been April Ashley, Portrait of a Lady, talking about a trans woman, but actually that wasn't. It's something that, on a much smaller scale recently. So in our People's Republic Gallery, we always have a changing display as part of our City, Our Stories programme. So one of the first ones was around Welsh identity and the Welsh nation. So a lot of people from Wales had moved to Liverpool, so we'd worked with the Welsh community. In 2016, we changed that into a display working with the Easter Rising Commemoration Committee, so looking at what happened in Ireland when people fought against the British state in 1916. And then the third one that we've done is we've worked with the Orange Lodge, who are a Protestant organisation, kind of come out of Ireland, date back to the 17th century. And there are many Protestant lodges, Orange lodges in Liverpool. So it's very much part of the city. There was the kind of orange and the green of the kind of Irish Catholics. So there was times when it was very difficult, particularly during the middle of the 20th century. That's not there now, but there's still quite a mistrust and misunderstanding of the Orange Lodge, and they wanted to work with us as part of the Our City, Our Stories programme to tell their story. So that's been quite controversial for us. We felt that we can't say that we're about, so they're not prescribed, they're not an illegal organisation, they don't overtly do anything racist, although you could question some of their motives and how they operate. So we decided that we would work with them, and how we've done that Our City, Our Stories programme is, as a museum, we've asked questions and they've responded, and we've made it very clear that they're their responses, and we've also talked about it just in the same way that we do around all our collaborative work, that we've done it together. So it would be quite straightforward to create an exhibition as a museum and have a viewpoint as a museum. It's much harder to do that in a collaborative way. And we thought it would be controversial. The two members of my team who worked on it are both Catholics, not Protestant. And so they really thought about what they were doing and how they were doing it. So we got ready in terms of press and media. We did a whole frequently asked questions, FAQ document for staff, and then we also have one on our website, and we've had some people saying they understand why we've done it, because it's a really important part of the city's history, and then we've had a lot of attack that we shouldn't have done it at all. So it's been really hard, and I knew it was going to be hard. I still think it was the right thing to do, and we've tried to do it in the right way, but we'll see. It's just been open for a few months at the moment, and it will be there till the end of the year. So we'll see how it goes. But it has been really controversial, and it's quite small. You know, it's no bigger than the size of this desk.
Bardzo proszę.
Bardzo mnie ciekawi, jak dużą część powierzchni zajmuje wystawa stała. Rozumiem, że to jest pierwsze piętro, ale 10 000 metrów kwadratowych to sporo. Procentowo, jak wygląda ta przestrzeń na działania, a stałe ekspozycje?
Okay, so the whole building is 10,000 square meters, of which 8,000 square meters is public space, and more than 5,000 square meters of that is gallery space. So in each of our big main galleries, we have permanent exhibition and spaces for more changeable temporary exhibition, and then more rapidly changing displays. So when we first opened, our idea was that we would have changing exhibitions within the main gallery spaces, and we had planned a staff and a budget to do that. But we opened in 2011, and in 2012 we had big cuts in the museums, so 30% cuts. So we've never really had the budget or the staff to do it exactly how we wanted to do it. So we've got a space for special exhibitions, which is quite small, and to create double fantasy, we've taken out part of a permanent gallery to create big enough space to create 1,000 square meters, because it was a real one-off opportunity to do something on that scale with Yoko Ono. But from that, we've learned that we need to create a proper special exhibition space. So although we will continue to change content within all of our galleries, we will create a permanent special exhibition space. So we'll have, so at the moment we probably have around 350 square meters that we change regularly. We're going to create another space that's around 500 square meters for special exhibitions. So the ratio will be around 3,500 square meters of permanent exhibitions to about 1,500 of special exhibitions once we get to where we need to be, which will take us another year to get there, I think. But that's a change really from that initial concept, and I think we've found that we have to be realistic about what we can afford to do.
Bardzo proszę.
Ja mam takie pytanie dotyczące trochę definicji samej koncepcji muzeum, bo Państwo go tworzyliście od zera. Bo tak słuchając tej bardzo ciekawej zresztą prezentacji, za którą bardzo dziękujemy, zastanawiałam się, czym jest współczesne muzeum i jak go można zdefiniować. Bo to muzeum to troszkę taki, różne mi przychodziły pojęcia do głowy, troszkę taki miszmasz. Troszkę taki system, który składa się od nadawców i odbiorców, którzy wszyscy tworzą właściwie to miejsce. To trochę dom kultury, to trochę właśnie, przyszła mi taka myśl do głowy, że to trochę książka, którą się właściwie pisze na bieżąco, która mówi o teraźniejszości, a wcale nie o przeszłości, tak? I pani jeszcze bardzo często mówiła, że to jest miejsce, które ma duże znaczenie w ogóle dla budowania tożsamości tego miejsca i tego miasta. Ja mam właśnie pytanie i zastanawiam się w ogóle nad koncepcją współczesnych muzeów, które się w ogóle bardzo zmieniają i ten element jakby relacyjności, wchodzenia właśnie w dialog z odbiorcami, którzy tak naprawdę są częścią tego systemu i też go tworzą, jest bardzo istotne. Czy Państwo jak konceptualnie myśleliście na początku o tym miejscu, to mieliście już jakiś pomysł, czy właśnie próbowaliście to jakoś zdefiniować? Bo ja się zastanawiam, czy to jest muzeum, księga, system, czy to w ogóle jest muzeum?
Okay.
Gosh. It was long question. It was long question. Everything is clear?
I think that was an amazing comment, and well, thank you for that. well, you know, you can talk about conceptual frameworks as in what the big themes are for museums, or also the concept of what a museum is. And, you know, I think you've picked up that we've tried to do quite a bit of thinking about actually kind of what a museum is. So you ask a very good question. So, well, what are museums? So I think museums are really special places that help us in terms of understanding the present by linking us to our past, enabling us to explore places with many different stories. We certainly thought a lot about that conceptual framework around identity and around involvement. And I think that's a kind of a change in power in terms of how we were thinking about a museum. But, you know, making a concept reality is always the challenge, and I hope I've tried to show that some of the ideas that we had, we've really tried to live them as the museum's developed, really, since it opened in 2011. I'm not sure whether that's answering your question, but I think your comment was very, you know, you absolutely captured all the different things that we've thought about. Does that help? It's an ongoing conversation, isn't it? I mean, I like the idea of, you know, museums as a place as a biographer of a place. And, you know, I've spent 2 days in Krakow now. I feel very privileged to have been able to spend those 2 days walking around your streets, visiting your museums. The one thing that I haven't done is go to any kind of art galleries or contemporary art, because I think contemporary artists are people who are perhaps the most brave in terms of helping us understand the world we live in.
I have one more question regarding one of the last things that you said. When you were saying about the museum and the public, you said we share power. And could you please elaborate on that a little bit? What power does the museum have, and in what way, in the case of your museum, it is shared?
Okay. So, power is a really interesting thing to think about and spend some time on. So I don't know how museums have perhaps thought about what power they have. So if I think about 6.5 million people have been to the Museum of Liverpool since we opened, then I believe we have incredible power, actually. And that's kind of symbolic power, where people can find out about perhaps subjects and themes that they'd never really thought about. So I think it's really important that we do understand that museums have power. So they're not just a day out. They're doing a lot more in terms of society, in terms of safe places, social places where different ideas can be explored. And that is really powerful. And I think that anyone who visits museums or works in museums or works in kind of history, heritage, should really think about that. So I think there's a lot to talk about in terms of power. When I talked about shared power, is that I believe in the theory around participation, but that means that there's a whole piece of work that was done in the 1960s called the ladder of participation, which we spoke about earlier. And so there are different ways that people engage with any kind of powerful kind of area that they engage with, and how much you share that ultimately. And I said pretty much at the start that I felt that the museum had an editorial role, and although we will enable many voices, that we still have an editorial role because we still have a responsibility. So I think with power comes responsibility. So the museum still has that, and although we do a lot of participative work, we don't give that up, because I think that's something that we have to have as a museum. Other people might disagree with me and say that actually, you know, we don't need to have that. I heard some people speaking last year from a museum idea that they're planning in Sweden, where there was going to be no power and the museum was completely, totally democratic. So there'll be lots of ways of thinking about that. But I think that sharing of the power is actually kind of sharing of how we do things, and also in what we decide to do as well. So I suppose one of the examples that I showed, the work with Wicked Fish, the theatre company, so those 3 young people with learning difficulties chose how they wanted to be represented, how they wanted their story to be told. So actually we shared that power of the museum with them, absolutely shared. It was shared in terms of everything we did, but it was still small organisation, big organisation, and you can't escape. There's a power dynamic there. So I think we'd be naive to think that there wasn't.
Ja mam jeszcze, Janet, jedno pytanie. Ono będzie chyba krótsze. Dlaczego dzika ryba?
Oh, do you know? I don't know. I don't know. There we are. We can ask them.
Odpowiedź jeszcze krótsza.
Theatre company, creative, all of those things.
Proszę Państwa, bardzo serdecznie dziękuję Państwu za obecność. Przyjechała do nas podzielić się muzealną mocą Janet Dugdale z Liverpoolu. Bardzo proszę o klaski. As I remember, you invited all of us to Liverpool.
Absolutely. 3 flights a week.
Proszę Państwa, ja chciałem jeszcze, dziękując Państwu za obecność, powiedzieć, że pan Krzysztof i pan Michał patrzą na mnie i przeszyli mnie wzrokiem, więc się w tej chwili zmitygowałem, że mam jeszcze Państwa zaprosić na następny nasz wykład. Tylko, panie Krzysztofie, zgubiłem tą kartkę, co pan mi dał. Więc ja Państwa zapraszam na następny wykład, który będzie... Tak, ja wiem, kto przyjedzie, tylko kiedy? 6. To ja proponuję, żebyśmy uzgodnili to, zanim zaproszę. 8 maja zapraszamy Państwa na godzinę 17. Tym razem to nie jest prowokacja, proszę Państwa, to nie będzie Liverpool, tylko to jest takie miasto w Polsce, o ile pamiętam, nazywa się Warszawa. Tym razem Muzeum Warszawy opowie nam o swojej ostatniej wystawie Warszawskie Rzeczy. Przyjedzie pani dyrektor Ewa Nekanda-Trepka. Zapraszam Państwa bardzo serdecznie na następną muzealną opowieść i następną porcję muzealnej energii. Dziękuję Państwu za obecność. Thank you so much.